Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel, and I'm back with the Days of Noah Part 2. This post is going to be full of very interesting information I found, which gives me a lot of interest in November 13th, the start of the flood, according to the Septuagint. So let's dig in and see what Scripture has to say and what the stars are saying. So today we will review evidence from the story of the flood as it correlates with the stars at the fall of ancient Babylon that all point to November 13th. Now that the Atzeret has passed on all sliver moon calendars, we can safely conclude that my projections of things happening on the Atzeret, according to Joel 2:15-16, was off. That's assuming I am still correct about the year. But given I've got 5 interconnected prophecies all confirming the year, I'm pretty confident I've got the year right. So we should be looking to this fall being the fall of Babylon. So let's review Joel 2:15-16 to see how we can understand it in light of the fact that nothing happened on the Atzeret. Blow a trumpet in Zion, that's Feast of Trumpets. Consecrate a fast, Day of Atonement. Proclaim an Atzeret, that is the 8th day of Tabernacles, and then gather the people. Now, I had previously interpreted this as gathering the people is going to occur on the Atzeret, but this could also be another reference to another event. And that event is the gathering of the animals into the ark, which occurred on the 27th day of the second month, which, and flood times, the year started at Tishri, so that would be the 8th month. So you can view the animals coming into the ark as the nations. The Bible frequently compares the Gentile nations to wild animals. And so if you're going to gather the nations, when are you going to do it? The anniversary of the flood. So I've used the Septuagint's accounting for the days of Noah, because remember, Yeshua said it will be as like the days of Noah. So we should really study the timeline of Noah to understand the timing of the end. So most of you are probably reading Bibles translated from the Masoretic text. But the Greek Septuagint is a translation from the Hebrew that was done 200 years BC. So this is an ancient translation from Hebrew to Greek, and we've got lots of copies of this Greek version of the Bible. And it was done with a lot of checks and balances, especially in the book of Genesis. So, the scribal errors or intentional corruption introduced in the Masoretic text could be a problem. But we're going to test these things and see what the scriptures have to say. So I'm not going to go into all the evidence for the Septuagint. In this particular case, the Septuagint isn't always right. But in this particular case, I think it's got a lot of good points. So the main difference is that the flood started on the 27th day instead of the 17th day. And the mountains were visible on the first day of the 11th month instead of the 10th month. You just see some off by 1 errors in the text for some reason. When you plot out the Septuagint numbers, everything lines up perfectly for a 1 year or 360-day flood or flood event. So if my understanding is correct, then the October 9th sign of 2024 would mark the start of 7 solar years of tribulation, which will end on the Day of Atonement, October 9th, 2031. All right, let's look at the timeline. From Genesis chapters 7 and 8. It says, the waters continued to recede until the 10th month. On the first day of the 11th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So, we've got 10 months, 10 complete months of the flood waters going, and the first of the 11th month is when the tops were available. Then, after 40 days, so 40 days from the first of the 11th month, Noah opens the window, and the raven and the dove are released. The dove comes back, and the raven goes to and fro. So Noah brought the dove back in, waited 7 days, released it again. So then this time the dove comes back with the olive in its. Then we wait another 7 days, and the dove is released, and it doesn't return. And you add it all up. In the first day of the first month, they remove the cover, and the surface of the ground is dry. So that's 1 year, starting from the first day of the first month to the first day of the first month, all according to the Septuagint. From the start of the flood until the surface of the ground is dry. I guess it was still muddy or something, because he doesn't leave the ark for another 56 days. So let's plot out this. We've got the first month plus 26 days. That will take you to the start of the flood on the second month on the 27th day. So that's 56 days. You have 150 days with the water prevailing, so the water's growing. And then you have 150 days where the water is receding. And then at the end of the 150 days, the surface is dry, plus or minus 4 days. So we overlap the 30 days to the first of the 11th month, the 40, the 7, and the 7. And then, of course, you have this last 7 days until you get to the first. So that lines up with a nice 777 from start of 1 year to the end. You go another 56 days, and now the ground is completely dry, and that gives you 360 days from the start of the flood to the end of the flood, as defined by the Septuagint. So that's the timeline. But let's look at some of the similarities between the flood and the coming judgment by fire described in the New Testament. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, the fountains of the great deep, which could be compared to the bottomless pit, burst forth, and the floodgates of heaven, which could be compared to a door opened in heaven, were opened. And of course, Revelation says, behold, a door standing open in heaven. So he looked and he saw a door open in heaven, floodgates open. Now we have the fifth angel sounded, and he saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and it was given him the key to the bottomless pit, the great deep. And he opened, and it burst forth from the bottomless pit, and smoke came out. So instead of water coming out, we have smoke coming out this time, like a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. So we know that the skies, the sun and the moon and the stars, are darkened because of the smoke. This is not a supernatural darkening. It tells us right now it's smoke. Then out of the smoke, locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have. So scorpions have the power to sting or to burn. They were commanded not to harm the grass or any green thing or any tree. So these are not locusts that eat vegetation, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So those who have his seal are not going to be harmed by whatever is coming. This is a case for the pre-tribulation rapture. And they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. 5 months is 150 days, just like the flood, where the waters prevailed or tormented them for 5 months. This torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. In those days, men will seek death and not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. I don't think this is saying that people are going to be immortal, unable to die. I think it's going to be that the living will envy the dead. You'd rather die in the initial nuclear blast than try to survive through the famine and plagues and radiation that follows. So we can see several clear parallels from the days of Noah. They both start with the door, a floodgate being opened, and then you have a judgment of the flood or fire, smoke bursting forth. You have 150 days of torment as it rains down like fallout on the people from the heavens. So I'm guessing the majority of the fallout is the first 40 days, just like the flood describes. So you can say the symptoms of radiation burns and scorpion stings are similar, in that trees and other kinds of vegetation have proven remarkably resilient to the intense radiation around Chernobyl. So all the vegetation in Chernobyl is fine, but animal life is suffering. So these are scorpion stings that look like radiation burns. So if this analogy of the days of Noah is correct, then November 13th on the full moon calendar is the anniversary of the start of the flood, and also exactly 2,520 days, which is 2 times 1,260 days, from the Day of Atonement in 2031. Most people expect the tribulation to end on the Day of Atonement, and then from there they clean up bodies for 5 or 6 months, and then you have your first Passover. So, given the 1,260 days for the 2 witnesses, followed by the 1,260 days for the woman being cared for in the wilderness, it would be complicated to go beyond November 13th of this year without pushing the end of the tribulation into tabernacles or even into 2032, which doesn't line up with our year count prophecies. So that's a really nice confirmation of the timelines lining up. And here are the verses that talk about the 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. So this is the 2 witnesses prophesying under the smoky clouds, right? Nuclear winter. So I think it's the sun or the days that are clothed in sackcloth or smoke and clouds, and not the witnesses, because other places in Revelation talks about the sun being dark as sackcloth or like sackcloth. So sackcloth is compared to what's covering the sun. And of course, the women fled into the wilderness after the desolation of the abomination, where God prepared a place to care for her for 1,260 days. So this is what our timeline looks like. And of course, Noah went into the flood. So Noah was warned that in 7 days things would happen. So there might be some kind of warning 7 days before the 13th, which would be on the 6th of November, right after the election in the United States. So this is all very fascinating. The other interesting thing is it lines up with the flood starting just before the full moon. We were told he'd come back by the full moon, and it's also just before a Sabbath. So this is a Sabbath full moon window here, depending upon your time zone. So all those things are lining up nicely. There's a lot of alignments there. So now, of course, if I'm wrong about Septuagint, then November 3rd would be the Masoretic flood date, which means we would already be in the 7-day warning. So I don't think the Masoretic is correct for numerous reasons. So I'm not expecting much to happen here. Although I would not be surprised if we had blackouts or something around these days due to solar radiation events, solar flares, things like that. All right. So now let's compare this timeline to ancient Babylon. Because what has been done will be done again, right? Things will rhyme, and we can compare what was going on in the stars with what was going on back then. So we know that Babylon fell on October 12th, 539 BC, and that the writing on the wall would have been on October 11th. So the book of Daniel records that the writing was near the lampstand. In Revelation documents the 7 churches are the lampstand of the 7 stars and 7 angels. So here's what Daniel 5:5 says. At that moment, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace, as the king watched the hand that was writing. The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw on my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. And of course, in my previous videos, I've connected the Pleiades to the 7 churches. Now, imagine my surprise to find that the full moon was next to the candlesticks, marking the Feast of Trumpets and announcing the fall of Babylon. Negative 538 AD is the same as 539 BC. So this is on October 11th at the fall of Babylon. The writing is on the wall, marked by the full moon and the candlesticks. All right, so that's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's keep going. So the moon often serves as God's finger in the sky, marking events. So, for example, the moon was in conjunction with Saturn when the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. All right. So now, this is what was written on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel parsin. And the meaning of tekel means you have been weighed on the scales and found to be deficient, and that your kingdom will be divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. So the Medes are to the north of Iran. So this could be Russia and Iran. I believe I'm correct in that. So at the fall of ancient Babylon, the sun was in the scales. It was weighed in the scales. Sun's in the scales. And we find the exact same message for the fall of Babylon the Great on November 13th. The sun is in the scales. Well, this is only possible because of the precession of the equinox. It moved where the sun is a whole month in the sky. So that's interesting. And, of course, the moon is on the rapture fish being carried away on eagle's wings. Where the body is, the angels or the eagles will gather. So we're told that the body is going to be gathered by eagles. And, of course, Pisces is associated with the fish, the church, and one of them is separated from the rest. So this is where the moon happens to be on the anniversary of the flood. And Saturn is standing still, exiting retrograde under the bowl of wrath. Previously, I thought, well, this is about 40 days from October 9th, but it's actually right here, marking the start of the flood. That was very, very interesting to see Saturn right there in its retrograde orbit. And remember, Saturn is a symbol of Babylon. Its name adds up to 666 in ancient Arabic. I'm using their gematria. And of course, it's got the millstone or the ring, and it's being thrown under the bowl of wrath being poured out. So it's standing still under the bowl of wrath at the anniversary of the flood. I find it interesting that Saturn was also in Aquarius. You see the border here for Aquarius in the red. And at the same point in its retrograde motion on the day that Babylon fell, right? It's just changing from retrograde to forward motion, just like it is here, retrograde to forward in Aquarius. Not under the bowl of wrath, because it wasn't destroyed. It was more of a peaceful takeover. But nevertheless, there it is. And of course, Mars and Saturn were both in Aquarius when it fell. And so Saturn is only in Aquarius 2 out of every 60 years. So the odds of picking 2 random years and finding Saturn in Aquarius is about 1 in 1,000. Finding Saturn in the week that it exits retrograde motion both times is about 1 in 1,000,000. So let's look at some other interesting things that happen. About 3 days before, on 11/10, 11/11, what happens is that the moon covers Saturn under the bowl of wrath. So you could view this as kind of like the moon being the finger that's a warning 3 days ahead of time. Now, this is part of a larger pattern that was incredibly rare, is that Saturn has been covered by the moon for 11 months in a row, starting the 3rd day before the April 8th eclipse, the eclipse that completed the Aleph Tav over the United States. And so this is where you'll be able to view the moon covering Saturn. It's going to be in conjunction for the whole world, but it's actually going to cover it for this region of the Earth on November 11th. So, to give you an idea of how rare this is, on average, the moon only covers Saturn about twice a year. But the events can be irregular. Some calendar years can have up to 13 months that cover it, but not everywhere on Earth sees it. But other years can have no coverings of Saturn in any part of the world. And there can be gaps with no coverings of Saturn that can last between 2 to 5 years. So you end up with a bell curve where the average is twice a year, but to have 11 times in 1 year, or to go 5 years without any coverings, they're on the edge of the bell curve. So this is a rare event. And what's interesting is one of these coverings was on the Feast of Trumpets on September 17th, and the next was 3 days after the October 9th sign. So Feast of Trumpets was a full moon covering, which is fascinating. So the reason why I think it's fascinating that Saturn is covered by the moon is because Babylon is going to be thrown down, never to be seen again. So the symbology works really interesting there. I'm not saying that's what it means. I'm just saying, hey, that's interesting. And the number 11 is transition or reflection. There's lots of study in the meaning and significance of the number 11. To have it appear 11 times, starting at the beginning of this year, is very fascinating. So there are some other signs, like what else is going on in the sky on November 13th. So Mars is in Cancer, but in the Mazzaroth, which you can check out at mazzaroth.info, or click the link available from my Medium blog, is actually a symbol of an eagle or a sword in the Hebrew version. So Mars is in the eagle, which is symbolizing the sword. So you got the great red sword, the red horse, the sword, potentially being symbolized by Mars. I'm not saying that's what it is. Reading star signs can be easy to rationalize, but it is an interesting coincidence. And so the biblical interpretation of the sign, so this is a screenshot from Mazzaroth.info, is the prince elongated in width. At the time of Jacob's trouble, the second coming, the binding of Satan, and the ascension of the saints is what they said it was associated with. This is their interpretation, not mine. And they studied the constellations relative to their meaning in the Bible much more than I have. So as an eagle stirs up her nest, flutters over her young, spreads out her wings, take them to bear her on her wings. All right. So now we can go to the next star and see where it is. We have Venus in Sagittarius. So that could be your rider on a white horse being pointed out there. You know, I was looking at these things on October 9th. Could be rationalizing these things, but nevertheless, there is a story being told by things. And one thing that is interesting is if you go back to the ancient Babylon and look at what happened on November 5th, you had Mars in conjunction with Saturn. I don't know if that means anything, but I just thought it was an interesting observation. And of course, on 11/11, the moon is going to be covering Saturn, or is going to be in alignment with Saturn and Jerusalem. So from Jerusalem to the moon to Saturn is going to line up perfectly, directly during nautical twilight, that exact precise window. So those are the observations of the sun, moon, and stars as it relates to November 13th, which is the 27th day of the 8th month, which is the fall of the flood. That's when the Great Flood started, and it correlates with the fall of Babylon, and is exactly 7 years, 30-day months from the Day of Atonement. So all those things line up. We can't really get too much later with the year being correct. So if all the prophecies pointing to 2024 are correct, and you have to get 2,520 days into the tribulation period, well, then it's hard to do that because the number of days from the start of Tishri 1, Feast of Trumpets, to the flood start on the 27th, plus the 360-day times 7 length is exactly the number of days in 7 years, or solar years. So as soon as you start going past November 13th, we start having trouble. Now, could it go past November 13th? Yes, we could go another 2 weeks, and maybe it's the sliver moon that's guiding things, and in which case everything would be shifted 2 weeks. But then all the other alignments with ancient Babylon start to break down. So I think there's some significance to Saturn standing still under the bowl of wrath right at a full moon. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time.